I've come across a pretty interesting topic on YouTube regarding the Phantom Thief and the supposed hypocrisy when it comes to changing the hearts or changing the cognition of the targets. At first, it is pretty damning with the fact that the game represents characters like Shido, Maruki, and Akechi, but doesn't directly call out the Phantom Thief for using the same means to an end. And to add more to that point, all the help that they use in the metaverse was like in a bubble because society regressed as a whole and became more and more dependent on the thief doing everything for them, which is what they were not trying to do. They were trying to use the metaverse to like inspire people to stand up for themselves. But because society is so stale and just complacent, they use the thief as an excuse for them to dump all the problem instead of actually like standing up and working on it. But I digress. This argument falls apart because the moment you add context, it really doesn't make sense. I think comparing characters like Kamoshida, Madarame, or Shido to the thieves, or even antagonists like Maruki and Akechi is kinda crazy because with the smallest amount of explanation, you can see that both the way they operate is vastly different. All the antagonists forcefully impose their distorted desires on the victim. Kamoshida sees the school as his castle and every student as his servant, and the girls as his, let's just say servant also. Kaneshiro sees the city and the people as his property or his money. Even in his cognition, he doesn't even see them as real people. He's just walking ATM because the only value he has for them is the wallet. All the other antagonists have the same pattern of projecting their cognition on others. They don't need a metaverse, but the way they see them like in the real world is basically the same way as they see them in the metaverse basically. The Phantom Thief on the other hand use the metaverse more like a reaction to that projection. They never go out of the way to change someone's heart. It's always like a request, a reaction, or a last case scenario. The one time they purposely changed the heart of someone or of society, I guess, was in the Death of Mementos, where they had to take action because the one thing that was keeping them afloat, the support of the public, was rendered useless because the mass were starting to forget the thieves and deem them useless. It's very funny that there's so many debates in the fandom about the themes, the story, and the characters. But P5 is very on the nose when it comes to theme and commentary. I'm not saying it's not deep, which is not the fact. I think P5 is very deep, but all the major aspects that the game is trying to explore is literally told to you or explored. And it's always those same points that are already explored that the fandom always keeps on messing up, which is hilarious, but I digress. I don't blame anyone who was confused about the thieves not being criticized by the plot because the game doesn't tell you most of the other cases like with the themes, but with enough context clues, you can understand why both sides are vastly different. Even Maruki, he has the best arguments against the thieves. He's using the metaverse to give people better lives and making society better as a whole. But later on, everything falls apart because he's applying his own views on people and changing other person who didn't ask to be changed. It would be one thing if a person shown themselves and asked to be changed. At that point, who are we to disagree? It's their own choice and they have their own agency. We have to respect that. But the moment you forcefully change someone's cognition as an action, as your own decision, you are no longer the savior you think you are. That's where Maruki kind of not falls flat, I won't say that, but falls apart. He's basically doing what he thinks is better for them instead of what they actually need, you know? He's applying his own version of good instead of what they actually need. But I digress. I think the better question to ask for something that actually makes sense and for something that actually might be a problem is, was using a metaverse actually helpful for society as a whole? Because we see that the masses have regressed and became more and more complacent with the thieves being able to fix the problem. That's actually much more interesting because the game actually goes in two different ways, which doesn't make sense. It shows you that yes, it technically worked in like helping society, but the masses themselves have never actually like stood up until like they were all in danger. The Phantom Thief were basically trying to help people stand up for other people, not letting them be oppressed, but the masses only stood up for themselves when they were all in danger, like themselves first, and then they see that society is messed up, and it was after all those problems that they want to actually stand up and actually help society move forward as a unit. I can understand the argument of the game not punishing or not calling out the thief for using the metaverse how they want to or how they please to like change society, but the way the game is set up, not the game itself, not the gameplay, but the plot, the game that Yellow Buff set up was conceived with the metaverse in mind. The fact that Yellow Buff exists was already a game over for both sides, Akechi and Joker, because him being present at all means that society or humanity is doomed and long gone because He's the collective unconscious of like society wanted to be ruled over. That's Yaldabaoth. So him being present means that they lost from the get-go. And they needed a higher power to like change everything, so that's why the metaverse is here. The problem presented by the game are only solvable by the metaverse because that's the way the plot, the story is conceived. The real version of the Outer Shadows are so distorted in like the way of viewing people, even in the real person or even in real life, that only like a forced cognition is the solution for like all those people. There's no amount of like talking that can like talk down someone like Shido, Kamoshida, Kaneshiro, and all those people. Maybe Madarame, because he was like the most sane out of all of them. He did care about Yusuke, but except maybe him, every single antagonist who's actually like a bad person needs to be cognition changed for them to actually be able to like save people. That's literally the only way. Now, personally, my biggest issue with the game is that it punishes you by by showing you that using the metaverse wasn't actually helpful for society as a whole, and then doubles down by showing you the state of the masses. The general public are cooked. They are the most spineless people I've ever seen in like any type of game, and the saddest thing about it is that it is kind of true with the way everything is here now. The depths of Momentus is the most depressing level in the game. Everything is so bleak, dark, red, eerie, and just sad. Like compared to the other palaces, even though most of them are messed up and for messed up desires, at least there's some color, at least it looks nice. But the depths is just so depressing. Nothing feels nice. Everything is dark, red, depressing, sad. And it makes sense because the game has been building up to the masses being just spineless coward, and this is the best way to like represent it. Everything being so bleak, dark, and depressing. So back to the main point, the game does all this build up about the metaverse not being helpful for society and the masses being more and more dependent on the thieves, but the game itself only presents you in a situation where using the metaverse is the only way you can help the people. I know the whole gameplay loop is built around changing people's cognition, so of course they're going to use it. That makes sense. But making it the only way to help people and still trying to criticize that same action or that same method is very counterintuitive. It doesn't mesh well, you know. You can like have one problem, have only one solution, you try to criticize it, but the way you find a solution to that criticism is using that criticism problem. So I'm not even making sense, but that's kind of the way I see it. To make myself more clear, because I'm basically not making sense for the past 30 seconds, you can't preach about how well the thieves are doing using the metaverse and at the same time trying to use the argument of the metaverse not being the solution, because it really doesn't make sense. It's not a good enough answer. The gameplay shouldn't be the answer for such an important question. Defeating Yaldabaoth and freeing society from its control, fair enough, that's great, but they had to use the same tool the game was trying to criticize you for using. So at that point, what is the point of like portraying the uses of the metaverse in a negative light when it comes to the thieves? Because if you know at the end they're going to use the same problem, why not give like a different reason for why society is not moving forward, not making them complacent? That's my whole point. Maybe I'm just making stuff up, and if like you have a different point, please tell me. I'm open to like discussion. I think the game still has a lot we can learn from it, and it's just interesting to talk about. But this counterintuitive discussion about yes, using the metaverse was actually great, but in the long run, it's making society even worse than before because they are not even standing up for themselves. They are just going backwards. Really doesn't make sense. I think the best way to find a solution to that problem is give a different reason for the masses being more complacent with the thieves being here. Maybe have Shido have like a bigger role in the present game. Like I know he's like present in like almost every story arc, but seeing him more present on the screen like halfway through to see how he's impacting society and the way they view people. But yeah, that's all I gotta say. Thank you for watching. Do all the YouTube stuff and stay safe.